Big news from Walgreens. What does it mean for suppliers? Strategic moves you should make on this edition of the Savvy Supplier. Welcome into the Savvy Supplier, where our goal is to save you time and money. I'm Al Frank. Boyd Evert is here to bring you some important analysis today. But first, let me just give you the story in a nutshell. Walgreens is announcing its plans to close about 1,200 stores in the U.S. The company said that the store closures will happen over the next 3 years. About 500 of those store closures will be in this fiscal year. Right now, Walgreens has about 8,500 stores in the U.S., and the company did not say which stores will close. Walgreens reported that its net loss swelled to more than $3 billion in the final quarter of 2024. A big factor is the tight reimbursements for prescription drugs. But Walgreens has made a strategic shift to become more of a specialty pharmacy. Walgreens is expanding care for patients with complex, chronic, and rare conditions. It's a way for Walgreens to leverage its ability to store and handle specialty medications. Those have higher profit margins and higher reimbursement rates than traditional drugs. And this strategic move seems to be paying off. Total sales at Walgreens grew by more than 6% in the last quarter, climbing to $37.5 billion. So Boyd, let's get your analysis on all of this. What kind of impact might these moves have on retail suppliers?
Well, Al, product removal always makes me a little nervous. You sort of lose control over the situation, or you can. So there's several things that could happen with a store closure. Some retailers may decide to pull that inventory back into their warehouse system and redistribute it out to the different stores, especially the high turn items where they know that they could just use that merchandise elsewhere. The slower turn merchandise, typically they're going to want to either mark it down on clearance and sell through, and you provide usually a trailing credit, a funding like an instant rebate to get the merchandise out of those four walls. At the end of the day, anything that remains in that store, they're going to damage and out of the system. Damage or destroy is usually the code that they file these deductions under, in which case they're charging you back the total cost of the merchandise. So really, those are some of the things that can happen, and you usually want to get ahead of that narrative if you can.
Sounds kind of ominous. How would you suggest that suppliers might prepare for what's coming their way?
Well, I think the first thing you should do is reach out to the buyer, let them know that you saw the news story and you understand that you're going to be asked to help support those store closures. So rather than hope that they forget to ask you for funding, just plan on the fact that they are going to ask you for funding. And typically buyers appreciate the fact when you get ahead of it, especially if you're there proactively making offers strategically to present them with funding to help close those locations. So I'd say the first thing to do is reach out and see if you can find out where those stores are, and then start to estimate what the inventory is and what the bill is, and so you can start accruing for those funds.
So hope is in the strategy?
It
Is that
never
what you're
is. It's a recipe.
Yeah. Might there be a phantom inventory problem in the aftermath of this?
Absolutely. It's a good call out. So typically, anyone that walks into a store looking for something and somebody tells you in the computer it's here, and then you go to the shelf and it's not, that's phantom inventory, where the system is not accurately representing the physical product on the shelf. Every store has some measure of shrink, and the worst thing that you can do in this situation is pay for damage and destroy merchandise that doesn't exist. And so really that's an issue that you may want to, once you identify those locations, send a third-party store audit out to those stores just to make sure you get an accurate sampling of the amount of shrink that you're seeing in those stores.
It's so fortunate for all of us that you've got decades of experience, so nothing ever catches you by surprise, it seems like. But can you think of a similar situation to these store closures with Walgreens that might inform suppliers about what to expect?
Sure. I think the one that comes to mind almost immediately is Project Impact that Walmart ran back around 2010 or 11, where they were reducing the SKU count so that you wouldn't have as many items on the shelves, but you'd have more facings. Typically, when you have a lot of different items, the odds of you being out of certain products leaves some gaps in the shelves, and that particular project was an attempt to reduce the number of gaps on the shelves. So there was almost every supplier was impacted, and they had to remove items, and they were asked for funding for those things. So yes, that was a case of a massive amount of SKU reduction across thousands of suppliers.
Do you think that there might be an attempt by Walgreens to return a bunch of product back to suppliers? And if so, what should they do?
Yeah, that's the checkoff gun in the room. You see it, you don't talk about it, but if you don't provide funding, then they can always threaten to say, well, if you're not going to assist with the markdowns, if you're not going to pay for the remnant inventory that's in the stores after we get done with the markdowns, we'll physically return it, and we'll send you the bill for the handling and for the freight and then for the total cost of merchandise. And once you get it back, you can't really sell it because you've lost control of that inventory. No supplier's legal department is ever going to really let you turn around and return to merchandise and resell it as new. So yeah, that's always the elephant in the room, and so you need to provide some form of funding.
Yeah, I would think that, in the aftermath of the Tylenol tampering case, that just would be a non-starter.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so it's better to, rather than wait to get that threat, right, is to be proactive and say, instead of you returning that merchandise, we have an offer, and the best practice is usually to say, we'll give you so much money per store, right? And you basically calculate the amount of inventory across those locations that are impacted and come up with a round number and say, we'll give you, I don't know, $500 or $1,000 per store to exit those stores, right? And then, or you give them a flat fee. We'll give you $200,000 or $300,000 for all of those store closings. The nice thing about doing it that way is, one, you have some certainty surrounding how much funding you're going to provide, but also it's less likely that you're going to have an auditor come back and say, "Oh, you missed this inventory," and so it basically reduces the moving parts in the equation, and it gives you some certainty in your accruals. And I know the folks in credit and collections and finance, they like certainty. I think as well as you do in sales, and so approaching it from that perspective is usually a great idea.
So would you say that retail suppliers with Walgreens should expect a huge wave of deductions?
Yes, I would. I would definitely plan on paying some amount, and the sooner you start the conversation with the buyer, the sooner you get some certainty around this, right? Then you can have a plan in place, and especially if you're willing to pay that in advance of those closings. They always appreciate getting it a month early into their P&L. But the other thing is now you get it off the radar. And if you can prevent those transactions from being audited and being recalculated, restated, and the auditor asking for more funding, it's much better to negotiate a flat fee ahead of time, and then you never have to think about this event again.
Well, suppliers already have a full plate, and here comes another wave potentially of deductions that they have to handle. Any thoughts on how they can get some help with that?
Yeah, absolutely. We would love to be able to help you figure out what your liability is. Another moving part in this that comes to mind is a lot of suppliers have passed on price increases, and some of that inventory may have been sold in at the lower cost, but guess what? When you're doing product removal, you're going to be paying the current cost of that merchandise, not the average cost of inventory. So that's just another variable in that equation. I'm sure there's more that would come to mind if we had the time. But rather than go it alone, I think reach out to us and we'll be able to help you out.
Well, Boyd, thanks for your insights today. Really important stuff. And if you would like to contact Boyd directly, you can email him at boyd.everett@hrg-audit.com. That's boyd.evert@hrg.com. Or you can reach us at two different websites, SavvySupplierPodcast.com or hrg-audit.com. Feel free to share with us your comments, your questions, your suggestions on topics for future podcasts. We're really glad to hear from you. Also, please like and subscribe to the podcast. That will help us to reach more people. More people will find us, and we really do appreciate it when you take a moment to like and subscribe. You might even tell your coworkers that you finally found a podcast focused on helping retail suppliers. And you'll know that when there's some breaking news that might affect you, we're here with some news you can use. Our wish for you is this: wiser decisions, fewer deductions. See you next time on The Savvy Supplier.